And if they do that, they're willing to earn it. They're willing to go out there and fight and do what they need to do to earn the right to earn that opportunity. But if you're telling them no, you can't. You only can go so far. Frustration sets in.
Emmitt Smith never spent much time talking about hate. That was one of the reasons people respected him. Throughout his Hall of Fame career, he built a reputation as a leader, a winner, and one of the toughest players football had ever seen. But there is a difference between being polite and forgetting. Emmitt forgot very little. For 15 seasons, he carried the football through some of the most violent years in NFL history. Defenders targeted him. Rival teams circled Dallas on their schedules. Entire cities wanted to see the Cowboys lose. Every Sunday felt personal, especially during the 1990s, when the Cowboys stood on top of the football world and everybody wanted to knock them down. Most fans remember the records, the rushing title, the touchdowns, the Super Bowl rings. Emmitt remembered the people. He remembered the men who hit him after the whistle, the men who talked when they won, the men who celebrated when the Cowboys fell short. Some opponents earned his respect. Others earned something very different. Football back then was not built on friendships. Division rivals faced each other year after year. Old grudges never disappeared. A humiliating loss could stay with a player for an entire off-season. One cheap shot could change the way two men viewed each other forever. The game rewarded toughness, but it also created enemies. Emmitt understood that better than anyone. He spent years fighting through injuries that would have sidelined most players. He played through pain because that was what leaders were expected to do. What bothered him was never the pain itself. It was the disrespect that sometimes came with it. He could accept being beaten. He could not always accept being humiliated. As the years passed, certain names stayed with him. Some represented painful defeats. Some represented bitter rivalries. Some represented moments he never truly forgave. Together they formed a list of opponents who pushed him further than anyone else and left scars that lasted long after the games were over. These are the 6 people Emmitt Smith hated the most. Before we get to the list, we need to understand who Emmitt Smith really was. Emmitt Smith's story began far away from the bright lights of Dallas. He was born in Pensacola, Florida, into a working-class family where nothing came easily. Long before the records, the championships, and the Hall of Fame speeches, he learned a simple lesson that stayed with him for the rest of his life. If you wanted something, nobody was going to hand it to you. Even as a young athlete, Emmitt faced doubters. He was not the biggest running back. He was not the fastest. Scouts often looked at other players and saw more impressive physical tools. But Emmitt developed something that could not be measured with a stopwatch. He developed stubbornness. Once he believed he could beat someone, he refused to back down. That mentality followed him to the University of Florida. There, he quickly became one of the best running backs in college football. Yet criticism never disappeared. Some questioned whether he could survive in the NFL. Others believed he would struggle against bigger and stronger defenders. Emmitt heard all of it, and he remembered all of it. When the Dallas Cowboys selected him in the 1990 NFL Draft, he joined a franchise that was still rebuilding under head coach Jimmy Johnson. The Cowboys were not yet champions. They were trying to become relevant again. Emmitt arrived at exactly the right moment. His toughness matched the culture Johnson was trying to build. Over the next decade, the Cowboys became football's dominant team. Troy Aikman led the offense. Michael Irvin brought intensity. Emmitt became the engine that kept everything moving. Defenses knew he was getting the football and still struggled to stop him. That success created admiration, but it also created resentment. Around the league, many players grew tired of hearing about Dallas. They grew tired of seeing Cowboys stars on television. Most of all, they grew tired of watching Emmitt Smith win. The more successful he became, the larger the target on his back grew. Opposing defenders wanted to be the man who stopped Emmitt. Rival teams wanted to be the team that exposed Dallas. Every season brought new challengers and new grudges. Some remained professional. Others became deeply personal. By the end of his career, Emmitt had broken records that many believed would never fall. But championships and statistics only tell part of the story. Behind those accomplishments stood years of rivalries, confrontations, and bitter battles against men who refused to let him succeed without a fight. 5 players and 1 coach shaped many of the scars he carried. Number 6, Brian Urlacher. Brian Urlacher never pretended to like the Dallas Cowboys. And Emmitt Smith never pretended to enjoy playing against Brian Urlacher. By the time Urlacher arrived in Chicago in 2000, Emmitt was already one of the biggest stars in football. He had won championships, broken records, and established himself as the face of the Cowboys' running game. But Urlacher represented something new. A younger generation of defenders who had grown up watching Dallas dominate and were eager to bring that era to an end. The rivalry was fueled by more than just division pride. Bears defenders loved playing physical football, and Urlacher quickly became the centerpiece of that identity. At 6'4" and over 250 pounds, he moved with the speed of a safety and hit with the force of a linebacker. Running backs rarely escaped him once he locked onto them. Every time Emmitt faced Chicago late in his career, he knew exactly what was waiting. Urlacher was not interested in reputations. He did not care about Hall of Fame resumes. He treated Emmitt the same way he treated every other running back. His goal was simple: stop the run and make the offense feel it. What made Urlacher particularly frustrating was how often he seemed to be around the football. Emmitt could break through the line, avoid one defender, slip past another, and suddenly Urlacher would appear. Again and again, drives ended because the Bears linebacker refused to let small gains become big plays. The physical punishment was constant. Every carry became work. Every yard felt contested. For a player who had spent years controlling games, Emmitt found himself dealing with a defender who refused to be intimidated by his reputation. But the real irritation came from what Urlacher represented. He symbolized the changing of the guard. The Cowboys dynasty that had ruled the 1990s was fading, and players like Urlacher were helping lead the next generation. For competitors like Emmitt, that reality was difficult to ignore. There were moments when the Bears' defense celebrated loudly after stopping Dallas. There were moments when Chicago players made it clear they were no longer impressed by the legends of the past. For a proud veteran, that kind of public disrespect could sting more than any tackle. Urlacher did not break Emmitt. He did something Emmitt may have hated even more. He reminded him that football eventually belongs to somebody else. And Emmitt never liked that reminder. And he never forgot it. Number 5, Warren Sapp. Warren Sapp was the kind of player Emmitt Smith naturally disliked. Not because he was great. Emmitt respected greatness. He had spent his entire career competing against elite players. What bothered him about Warren Sapp was everything that came with the talent. The talking, the arrogance, the constant need to be the center of attention. Sapp built his reputation as one of the most disruptive defensive tackles in football. He was quick, powerful, and fearless. More importantly, he loved getting under people's skin. While many defenders let their play do the talking, Sapp preferred to do both. He could beat you physically and then remind you about it for the next 60 minutes. For a player like Emmitt Smith, that combination was difficult to tolerate. The Cowboys and Buccaneers developed a growing rivalry during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Tampa Bay's defense was becoming one of the best units in football. Sapp stood at the center of everything they did. Every game felt like a challenge to Dallas's reputation. Every stop felt like a personal victory for the Buccaneers. When Emmitt carried the football against Tampa Bay, there was never an easy yard available. Sapp and the rest of the defense attacked relentlessly. Running lanes disappeared. Blocking schemes broke down. Plays that normally gained 6 yards suddenly gained 1. But physical football was only part of the problem. Sapp loved humiliation. He loved making opponents feel small. He loved celebrating in front of them. He loved creating moments that cameras would replay for years. Many players viewed that behavior as entertainment. Veterans like Emmitt often viewed it as disrespect. There were times when Sapp seemed more interested in sending a message than simply winning the game. His confidence bordered on arrogance, and he never apologized for it. To younger fans, it was exciting. To opposing stars who had spent years earning respect the hard way, it could feel insulting. The frustration grew because Sapp often backed up every word. That was what made him dangerous. Trash talk is easy to ignore when it comes from an average player. It becomes much harder when it comes from someone capable of dominating a game. Emmitt spent years proving himself through consistency, discipline, and professionalism. Sapp represented almost the opposite approach. Loud, aggressive, unapologetic. The clash between those personalities made every meeting feel bigger than football. In the end, Warren Sapp did not need to beat Emmitt every time. He only needed to remind him that disrespect could come with a smile. And Emmitt hated that more than pain. Number 4, Reggie White. Reggie White was not a loud enemy. He did not need to be. Unlike Warren Sapp, Reggie White rarely relied on trash talk. He did not spend games trying to provoke opponents. He did not chase headlines. What made him dangerous was much simpler. He could dominate a football game with pure physical force, and Emmitt Smith knew it every time the Cowboys faced the Green Bay Packers. For much of the 1990s, Dallas and Green Bay became one of the NFL's defining rivalries. The Cowboys were trying to stay on top of the league. The Packers were trying to take that position away from them. At the center of Green Bay's rise stood Reggie White, arguably the most feared defensive player of his generation. Emmitt spent years running against elite defenders, but White was different. He combined size, speed, intelligence, and power in a way that few players ever have. Offensive linemen often looked helpless against him. Entire game plans were designed around slowing him down, and even then he frequently found a way to take over. That reality frustrated Emmitt. Running backs depend on rhythm. They depend on blocking. They depend on an offensive line creating order out of chaos. Reggie White specialized in destroying that order. One play could change everything. One sack could kill a drive. One tackle for loss could force an offense to abandon its entire approach. The Cowboys learned that lesson repeatedly. As Green Bay grew stronger in the mid-1990s, White became the symbol of the threat Dallas could no longer ignore. Every year the Packers seemed more confident. Every year White seemed more determined to prove that the Cowboys' dynasty was vulnerable. The humiliation reached its peak during the NFC Championship game following the 1995 season. Green Bay entered Texas Stadium believing they could finally eliminate Dallas. Although the Cowboys won that battle, the Packers continued closing the gap. Soon they were no longer chasing Dallas. They were replacing them. For competitors like Emmitt, that was difficult to accept. The Cowboys had spent years ruling the NFC. Suddenly another team was taking control. Reggie White stood at the center of that shift. His presence reminded Dallas that dominance never lasts forever. What made White especially frustrating was that there was no weakness to attack. He was respected throughout the league. Coaches admired him. Players admired him. Even opponents admired him. That left Emmitt with an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the man causing your problems is also the man you cannot stop respecting. But respect does not erase frustration. And it certainly does not erase painful memories. Every time Emmitt looked across the field and saw Reggie White in a Packers uniform, he knew the afternoon was going to be a fight. Some scars are earned through violence, others are earned through defeat. Number 3, Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders may have been the most complicated name on this entire list. Because before he became Emmitt Smith's teammate, he was one of the players Emmitt enjoyed beating the most. And one of the players who irritated him the most. Deion had a talent for attracting attention. Long before social media existed, he understood how to control a room, a stadium, or an entire television broadcast. He called himself Prime Time. He celebrated big plays. He talked confidently. He carried himself like a superstar because he believed he was one. For many opponents, that confidence felt like arrogance. Emmitt was never built that way. His personality was different. He preferred proving himself through work production and consistency. He did not need cameras following him everywhere. He did not need headlines. He wanted victories. That contrast created tension whenever their paths crossed. During the early 1990s, Deion played for the Atlanta Falcons, and later the San Francisco 49ers. Both teams regularly found themselves battling Dallas. Every meeting felt important. Every game carried playoff implications. Every big play received national attention. And Deion always seemed to be in the middle of the story. What frustrated players like Emmitt was that Deion often delivered exactly what he promised. He could shut down an entire side of the field. He could change a game with one interception. He could return a kick for a touchdown without warning. The confidence that annoyed opponents was backed by extraordinary talent. The rivalry reached another level during the 1994 season. That year, the 49 ERs were desperate to end Dallas's control of the NFC. They loaded their roster with stars. They spent the entire offseason talking about the Cowboys. Deion became one of the biggest symbols of that challenge. When San Francisco finally defeated Dallas in the NFC Championship game, many Cowboys players viewed it as more than a football loss. They saw it as a direct attack on the dynasty they had spent years building. For proud veterans like Emmitt, the celebration from the other side was difficult to forget. Then came the twist nobody expected. In 1995, Deion joined the Cowboys. Suddenly, the player who had spent years annoying Dallas became part of Dallas. The man who once represented the enemy now shared the same locker room as Emmitt Smith. The move created championships. It also created one of the strangest relationships in NFL history. Emmitt respected Deion's talent. He respected his competitiveness. But that did not erase years of frustration overnight. Some rivalries leave marks that remain even after the uniforms change. Deion Sanders became a teammate. But he never completely stopped being Deion Sanders. And for a man like Emmitt Smith, that could be exhausting. Not every enemy stays on the other sideline. Number 2, Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders never hit Emmitt Smith late. He never trash-talked him across the field. He never publicly attacked him in interviews. Yet few players frustrated Emmitt Smith more than Barry Sanders. The reason was simple. For nearly an entire decade, Barry's name followed Emmitt everywhere he went. No matter how many records Emmitt broke, no matter how many playoff games he won, somebody always wanted to compare him to the quiet running back in Detroit. The rivalry was unlike most rivalries in football. Dallas and Detroit did not play each other enough to build genuine hatred on the field. Instead, the battle lived in newspapers, television studios, sports bars, and living rooms across America. Every season seemed to produce the same argument. Who was better? The explosive magician from Detroit or the relentless workhorse from Dallas? Fans took sides. Former players took sides. Reporters built entire careers debating the question. What made the situation even more frustrating for Emmitt was the way people talked about their accomplishments. Barry Sanders was often praised as the most naturally gifted runner anyone had ever seen. His highlights were everywhere. Defenders missed tackles. Crowds stood in disbelief. Every week produced another impossible run that sports networks replayed for days. Meanwhile, Emmitt was carrying the football 30 times a game, grinding out tough yards, helping Dallas win championships. And somehow many people still acted as if he had something left to prove. That constant comparison became a different kind of punishment. Emmitt could dominate a game on Sunday and spend the next week answering questions about Barry Sanders. He could break a record and still hear people argue that Barry was the more talented player. To a competitor who spent his entire life fighting for respect, those conversations were impossible to ignore. The humiliation came from the public nature of it all. Every achievement seemed to come with an asterisk from somebody. If Emmitt won, critics pointed to Dallas's offensive line. If Emmitt broke another record, critics wondered what Barry might have done with the same supporting cast. It was not coming from Barry himself. In many ways, that made it worse. There was nobody to confront, nobody to beat, nobody to silence. Emmitt respected Barry Sanders deeply. He knew exactly how special he was. But respect does not always eliminate frustration. Sometimes the rival who stays in your head the longest is not the one who talks the most. Sometimes it is the one whose name keeps appearing beside yours year after year. He spent a decade competing against Barry Sanders, and he never escaped the comparison. Number 1, Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor hurt Emmitt Smith in ways that statistics could never measure. When Emmitt entered the NFL in 1990, Taylor was already a legend. He had changed the way football was played. Offensive coordinators built entire game plans around avoiding him. Quarterbacks feared him. Coaches feared him. Entire organizations feared him. For a young running back trying to establish himself in the league, there was no bigger test than facing Lawrence Taylor. The Cowboys and Giants rivalry was already one of the most intense in professional sports. It was physical, emotional, and deeply personal. Every game felt bigger than the standings. Every hit carried extra meaning, and whenever Dallas faced New York, Lawrence Taylor became the center of attention. What made Taylor so dangerous was his ability to destroy confidence. Plenty of defenders could make tackles. Plenty of defenders could make big plays. Taylor made opponents question themselves. Before the ball was even snapped, players were wondering where he was. Offensive linemen worried about him. Quarterbacks searched for him. Running backs knew he might appear from anywhere. Emmitt experienced that pressure firsthand. Every carry against the Giants felt harder. Every yard had to be earned through contact. Taylor played with a level of aggression that bordered on intimidation. He wanted opponents to feel his presence long before he actually touched them. Even when he did not make the tackle, he often disrupted the entire play. For a competitor like Emmitt, that was infuriating. Running backs rely on rhythm. They rely on trust. They rely on knowing where opportunities will appear. Lawrence Taylor specialized in destroying that sense of certainty. One moment a play looked perfect. The next moment Taylor had blown it apart. The humiliation came from how helpless even great players sometimes looked against him. Emmitt built his reputation on toughness and determination. Yet there were afternoons when Taylor simply overwhelmed everything Dallas tried to do. Fans saw a superstar running back fighting for every inch, while one defender repeatedly wrecked the offense. Those memories stayed with players far longer than victories. What bothered Emmitt most was that Taylor represented a truth every running back hated. No matter how talented you were, there were still defenders capable of changing a game by themselves. No matter how hard you worked, there were still men who could make your life miserable for 60 minutes. Emmitt respected Lawrence Taylor. Every serious football player did. But if this list is about the people who caused him the most frustration, the most pain, and the most difficult moments of his career, nobody belongs at number one more than Lawrence Taylor. Because when Emmitt Smith thought about opponents who made football feel impossible, one name always came back first. Some rivals beat you. Lawrence Taylor made entire teams feel powerless. Football fans often remember greatness through championships and records. They remember highlight reels. They remember Hall of Fame speeches. What they rarely remember are the grudges, the frustrations, and the people who made those achievements so difficult in the first place. For Emmitt Smith, this list was never really about hatred. It was about scars. Every name on this countdown represented a different challenge. Brian Urlacher reminded him that every generation eventually faces the next one. Warren Sapp showed him how disrespect could become a weapon. Reggie White forced him to battle one of the most dominant defenders football has ever seen. Deion Sanders blurred the line between rival and teammate. Barry Sanders became the comparison that followed him for an entire decade. Lawrence Taylor stood as the ultimate symbol of fear and disruption, and Buddy Ryan helped create one of the most hostile environments a player could face. What connects all of these names is not simply conflict, it is impact. None of them were forgettable opponents. None of them allowed Emmitt Smith to relax. Each one forced him to become tougher, more disciplined, and more determined. They challenged his pride. They challenged his reputation. Most importantly, they challenged his belief that success could be achieved without sacrifice. That is the strange truth about professional football. The people who make your career hardest often help define it. Without those rivalries, the victories do not feel as meaningful. Without those battles, the championships do not feel as satisfying. Without those enemies, the legend is never fully formed. Emmitt Smith retired as the NFL's all-time leading rusher because he survived those battles. He survived the hits. He survived the criticism. He survived the pressure that comes with carrying one of the most famous uniforms in sports. In the end, the good guys do not win. They survive. And that is why we remember Emmitt Smith.